player when they are. Robert Sensei. Growing areas like think that acceptance of have, but there comes a moment in sports where the noise stops, the adrenaline settles, and you are left sitting in absolute stunned silence that is the only place to begin after watching what unfolded in Dallas. If you are watching this on your television at home, I have to apologize in advance if the passion boils over, because what we witnessed on that basketball court was not just a frustrating road loss for the Indiana Fever, it was not just an off night for a superstar, and it certainly was not an ordinary run-of-the-mill regular season defeat. What we witnessed was an going as a snow and cultural breakdown so severe, so tactically bizarre, and so dripping with internal hypocrisy that it demands to be put under a microscope and examined piece by piece. Let that sink in for a moment. Just 24 hours ago, the narrative surrounding this team was entirely different. Yesterday, the conversation across the entire basketball landscape was about Caitlin Clark sitting firmly at the front of the MVP race. When you looked at the list of candidates being debated, whether it was Olivia Miles, Kelsey Mitchell, Asia Wilson, or Caitlin Clark, Clark was winning that race by a landslide. The debate was practically over. The momentum was undeniable. She was the driving engine of this franchise, the points leader among the candidates, and the clear front runner for the highest individual honor in the sport. And then in a single 40-minute span against the Dallas Wings, that entire foundation was cracked wide open. What happened on that floor has forced a dark, uncomfortable question into the spotlight. What on earth is going on inside the Indiana Fever locker room? When you watch the coaching decisions of Stephanie White, when you watch the on-court execution of Aaliyah Boston, and when you examine the shot selection and offensive dominance of Kelsey Mitchell, you are forced to confront a troubling possibility. This did not look like a cohesive team trying to win a basketball game. It looked like a coordinated effort to suppress Caitlin Clark, disrupt her rhythm, and systematically remove her name from the MVP conversation. Why would that happen? Why would an organization or a locker room subtly work against its own generational talent? The only logical revelation you can arrive at when you watch the film is that Caitlin Clark might not be completely sold on the Indiana Fever dream, and in response, the internal dynamics of this team appear to have fractured into jealousy, passive-aggressive sabotage, and blatant tactical abandonment. Let's start by breaking down the game itself, because the raw numbers and the flow of this contest tell a story that cannot be ignored. The Indiana Fever walked off the court in Dallas with a 6-point loss on paper. Losing a 6-point game on the road in professional basketball happens, but how they lost and why they lost is where the controversy live. Skip Bayless immediately took to social media after the final buzzer to point out the glaring anomalies. Bayless stated plainly that Caitlin Clark had a brutal, uncharacteristic off-night, shooting just for a 15 from the field and finishing without a single made free throw. In fact, over the entire duration of the game, Clark was awarded exactly one free throw attempt, one free throw in 40 minutes of basketball. For a primary ball handler who spends the entire game navigating aggressive traps, physical contact, and defenders draped across her jersey. Meanwhile, on the other end of the floor, Dallas was allowed to run completely wild or Ekagoon, but while they put on an absolute clinic, racking up 32 points and 6 assists, thoroughly outplaying Indiana's backcourt containment, Dallas simply had too much offensive firepower. But it wasn't just a goon, but a look at what Jessica Shepard did in the first half of this game. Shepard was scoring it while moving through the paint with zero resistance, putting on an absolute show to the point where she looked like an MVP candidate herself. Indiana's defense offered no resistance, no adjustments, and no interior physicality against Shepard, allowing Dallas to establish complete control of the game's tempo and what was happening to Caitlin Clark. Well down. Lois was flourishing. She was being physically dismantled without a single whistle from the officials or a single ounce of protection from her teammates. Consider the matchup with Paige Bueckers. Bueckers did not even have a standout game for Dallas. She was relatively quiet statistically, yet she was allowed to physically push, shove, and bump Clark without consequence. At one point in the game, an opposing defender literally tackled Caitlin Clark to the floor, leaving her visibly limping. Think about that visual. Your franchise cornerstone, the player who has brought unprecedented eyes to your team, is getting tackled, pushed, and bruised, and nobody in it. Indiana uniform steps up. Nobody gets in the defender's face. Nobody sets a hard screen on the next possession to establish a physical boundary. Nobody stands up for her. There was zero retaliation, zero enforcer mentality, and zero collective pride. She was completely on an island absorbing physical abuse while her own teammates watched in passive silence. Look at the progression of Clark's performance across the 4 quarters. In the entire first half, Clark managed to score just 5 points. She was completely out of sync, unable to find open looks, and totally starved of the ball in advantageous positions. By the end of the third quarter, after logging 25 grueling minutes on the quarter, stat line sat at 7 points, 2 rebounds, and 6 assists. When the final buzzer sounded, Clark's box score was a glaring indictment of the system she was forced to play in. 10 points on for a 15 shooting from the field to have a from 3-point range, 0 of 1 from the free throw line. For rebounds, 9 assists, 1 profound defensive block, and only 3 turnovers. Let us be completely fair and objective here. You cannot look at this stat line and blame turnovers, because 3 turnovers in a full game for a high-usage playmaker is exceptionally clean. You cannot say she was careless with the basketball. You cannot say she was giving the game away. What you saw when you watched her on the court was a player who was constantly forcing shots because she was given no other alternative. She was receiving zero help from the offensive scheme. She could not get into a rhythm. She could not get her Beat set on or jumpers, she was completely unable to shoot comfortably off the dribble because the spacing was non-existent. She was denied the fundamental opportunities to simply be Caitlin Clark. And why was she denied those opportunities? That brings us directly to the game film and specifically to the performance of Leah Boston. You do not need to be a professional video coordinator or spend your life dissecting game tape to see what happened on the floor. Stevie Wonder could see what went wrong with Indiana's screening actions. A primary responsibility of a starting center playing alongside an elite shooting guard is to set solid punishing screens that force the defense to make difficult decisions, creating the split second of separation a shooter needs. There was one play in particular that encapsulates the entire issue, a play that should infuriate anyone who cares about player safety and basic basketball fundamentals. Indiana was running an offensive set where Boston was positioned perfectly to set screen on Odyssey. So Sims watched the tape of that play, look at Boston's positioning, and look at her effort. Boston was supposed to plant her feet, absorb contact, and set a hard screen to free Clark on the perimeter. Instead, Boston actively pulled back. She avoided contact entirely. It looked as though she went out of her way not to hit Odyssey. Sims. Why does that matter? It matters because Odyssey Sims does not play for the Indiana Fever anymore. Sims is an opponent. You do not show courtesy to the opposing defense when your primary playmaker is running off your shoulder. Because Boston failed to set the screen, Caitlin Clark was completely blindsided by the defense. What if Clark had suffered a severe injury on that play? When a ball handler expects a screen that never comes, they are exposed to direct unexpected collisions. Clark took a blind hit because her center refused to do the fundamental job of setting a pick. This was not a rare one-off mistake. This was just one of many players throughout the night where Boston either slipped the screen prematurely, set a weak screen with no contact, or failed to position yourself to help Clark navigate through the defense when your starting center is not setting screens for your lead guard the entire offensive end. Yeah, stalls. Clark cannot get downhill. She cannot create the daylight needed to launch from deep. She is forced into contested late shot clock heaves because the basic mechanics of the offense have broken down now. Let us contrast Clark's suffocated evening with the offensive freedom granted to Kelsey Mitchell. Pull up the box score and look at the sheer disparity in usage, shot volume, and whistle equity. Kelsey Mitchell played 35 minutes in this game. In those 35 minutes, Mitchell put up 37 points, shooting 9 of 18 from the field and an incredible 7 of something from beyond the arc. Mitchell was shooting the basketball like there were no tomorrow. Possession after possession was designed, directed, and cleared out for Mitchell to attack and fire away. Furthermore, Mitchell finished the game with 5 assists that deserves acknowledgement because Mitchell is traditionally a pure scoring guard who does not distribute at a high volume. But look at the foul. The Kelsey Mitchell went to the free throw line over 10 times, leading the team in free throw attempts and receiving a favorable whistle on almost every drive to the basket. Think about the absurdity of that reality. Kelsey Mitchell gets 35 minutes, 18 field goal attempts over 10 free throw attempts, and finish with 37 points. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark, the runaway MVP front runner entering the game, is held to 15 contested shots, only 1 single free throw attempts, and is left to battle double teams and blindside hits with no screening assistance whatsoever. How does a coaching staff allow that level of imbalance to occur? That brings us to head coach Stephanie White. What was the game plan here, Stephanie? What were you doing on the sideline hours before this game even tipped off? The warning signs were already circulating. A tweet went viral roughly 4 hours prior to the contest cautioning fans to monitor Stephanie White's rotational strategies closely. But now that Clark's MVP candidacy was gaining massive national momentum, the Post warned that White might attempt to disrupt Clark's rhythm by burying her in stagnant lineups alongside players like Raven Johnson, Mercedes Russell, and Victoria Saxton, combinations that drastically shrink the floor and eliminate shooting space. While the exact lineup combinations featuring Russell, Johnson, and Saxton did not play out to that precise extreme during the game, the overall execution on the floor looked real spooky. The strategic decisions produced the exact same result that the pregame warnings predicted. Clark was isolated. Clark, with strip of spacing, the offense was visibly shifted away from her playmaking and funneled entirely into Kelsey Mitchell, scoring effectively, stalling Clark's statistical momentum on a night where the entire basketball world was watching. When coaching decisions align with on-court negligence from key players, you have to look beyond tactical and competence and examine the locker room culture. Is there a deeper layer of hypocrisy brewing behind closed doors? Look at Aaliyah Boston's behavior off the court. We've tried to let things slide. We've tried to give the benefit of the doubt, but the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. On her podcast, Boston has repeatedly engaged in such a sneak dissing aimed at Caitlin Clark, consistently hyping up Kelsey Mitchell while offering lukewarm, muted commentary regarding Clark. Why is the starting player using external media platforms to subtly shift praise away from the team's primary playmaker and elevate another teammate at her expense? When you see Snow dissing on podcasts combined with the refusal to set solid screens on the court, combined with an absence of physical protection, when the same teammate is tackled to the hardwood, you are no longer dealing with simple basketball miscues. You are dealing with active locker room friction. Caitlin Clark has to watch her back in that environment. It is becoming painful. The obvious that there are individuals inside that organization who do not like the spotlight, the praise, and the historic MVP narrative surrounding her. They do not want to see her run away with the award. Just yesterday, Clark was dominating the MVP conversation against elite league talent like Asia Wilson and Olivia Miles. She He was leading by a landslide. Her performance this season has elevated the entire franchise, bringing sold-out crowds, massive television ratings, and unprecedented relevance to an Indiana Fever organization that was irrelevant for years, and yet, instead of embracing that success, instead of building a protective wall around her, the team's actions on the floor against Dallas looked like a concerted effort to cut her legs out from under her. Clark's final numbers of 10 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds, and a profound block showed that even on a night where she was completely abandoned by the game plan, she still competed. She did not turn the ball over excessively. She tried to set up her teammates, dishing out 9 assists despite the suffocating defense, but you cannot expect any player to overcome both the opposing team and the structural failure of their own squad. This entire situation leads right back to the central issue facing this franchise. Is Caitlin Clark truly committed to the Indiana Fever dream, or is she beginning to see the cracks in the foundation if the coaching staff will not structure an offense that protects her rhythm, if the starting center will not set screens to protect her body, and if the room is filled with players subtly undermining her on podcast while taking 35 minutes and 18 shots to boost their own numbers? Why would any superstar buy into that long-term vision? A player of Caitlin Clark's caliber deserves an environment built on trust, elite execution, and mutual respect. What she received in Dallas was a masterclass in how to alienate a franchise player. She took the hits, she limped off the court, she was denied the whistle, she was denied the screens, and she was forced into an off night that directly damages her MVP standing. This game was a loud, unmistakable warning sign. You cannot ignore what the tape shows you. Cannot pretend the missed screen on Odyssey Sims was an hour accident. You cannot ignore the contrast between Kelsey Mitchell's 10-plus free throws and Clark's single attempt, and you cannot sweep the locker room tension under the rug any longer. The Indiana Fever have a massive problem on their hands if Stephanie White, Aaliyah Boston, and the leadership of this team do not look in the mirror, fake the hypocrisy, and start playing cohesive basketball that supports their generational talent. This situation is going to unravel completely. We're going to have a ton of content breaking down every single angle of this game and its fallout, because what happened in Dallas said everything you need to know about the current state of this team. Drop your thoughts in the comments section.